Chair, we are now live. Over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Planning Committee on the 6th of January 2021, first meeting of the new year. I'm your chair, Councillor Eileen Wragg. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout. May I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout the meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this planning meeting is dependent on internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or power supply or power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all phones are turned off or are on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone? And when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Sarah, can you read out the attendance list, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bloxson. Present. Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Desarum.
Present.
Councillor Gazzard.
Present.
Councillor Howe.
Present.
Councillor Key.
Present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Present.
Councillor Pook.
Present.
Councillor Pratt.
Present.
Councillor Skinner.
Present.
Councillor Whibley.
Present.
Councillor Woodward.
Present.
And Councillor Wragg.
Present.
Thank you, Chair. The meeting's quorate.
Thank you. Now, the running order for today's meeting and the speakers can be viewed under agenda item 1 on pages 4 to 5. Right, now we come to minutes of the previous meeting, pages 6 to 11. If anyone has a comment, wait a minute, just trying to find my blue hands. If anyone has a comment, please do so by raising your blue hand. If no blue hands are raised, I will take it that there are no comments. I see no blue hands raised. Therefore, we approve minutes of the previous meeting. Thank you. Agenda item 3, apologies. Wendy, can you confirm, please?
Just one apology from Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest.
Thank you. So I'll do this in alphabetical order. So starting with Councillor Bloxson.
No declarations, but I have been lobbied re-agenda item 8, 202089 M4, and I didn't attend the site visit, so I will not be taking part in the vote on that one. I was also lobbied re-agenda item 9, 201504.
Just a point, because you didn't attend a site visit doesn't mean to say, and I'm sure Mrs. Shaw will advise on this, it doesn't mean to say that you can't vote. That's been my experience.
I have been told before by Henry Gordon Lennox I couldn't vote, and I did check with Mrs. Shaw before the meeting, and she confirmed it wasn't advisable to vote.
Well, that's
Yes.
that's a departure from what I've been used to, certainly. Okay.
If I could clarify, Chair,
Yeah.
it is set out within the guidance
Okay.
for members for planning matters that you don't vote if you haven't attended on a site visit.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I, Shirley, just to confirm, this wasn't a formal committee site inspection or site visit. It was just an invite by the applicant's owners of the land for some members to be walked around the site. So it wasn't a formal site visit or site inspection.
No, it was for information only.
I see. If it wasn't a formal site visit, then I bow to the chair in that if it wasn't a formal site visit, then and it was only for select numbers of the committee, then that shouldn't bar those that didn't attend from sitting and voting and debating the matter.
Thank you. It hadn't come to committee previously, and a site visit agreed. It was a site visit entirely on its own. So that's for clarification for other members. Thank you, Mrs. Shaw. Right, so Councillor Bloxson, you will be able to speak on that one.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, declaration of interest.
Right.
Back to that.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, the only declaration, no declarations of interest. However, I've also received the same emails reference planning applications.
Join.
Thank you. And 21504. Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Yeah, I'm on the Exmouth Town Council on their planning committee. Otherwise, none.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Yes, like other members, I've received a number of emails and documents in respect of 22089 MFUL. I'm also a member of the Devon Wildlife Trust and of the RSPB. In respect of 201504 MOUT, I've also received a number of emails and documents. And it's a bit remote, but at one time I did do some teaching at Tipton St John Primary School, and I've also done a bit at King's School Ottery when I worked for the Devon Music Service.
Through you, Chair.
Yeah.
Could I ask members to declare what type of interest they are declaring, so that I need to ask Councillor Davey, is that a personal interest, or are you declaring any other kind of interest?
No, that's simply a personal interest, just to say that I have some knowledge of those schools that go back a few years.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor De Sarum.
No Exmouth items on this agenda, so no declarations there. And like other members, I received the appropriate emails on item 20/2089 MFUL for the Ottery and 201504 MOUT. So it was basically Ottery and the Budley and Raleigh issue on this agenda. So just those two.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzard.
None, Chair, but just to say that I received the same emails for the applications that have already been mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
Thank you. Yes, same emails as everyone else. And with regard to item 9, 21504, Tipton St John's School, I've chaired and been part of various members' advisory panels over many years on this, but I do not come with predetermination. I have still come with an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Key.
Yes, lobbied 1504.
1504. Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, thank you. Same emails which you sent on, Wendy, so you know the numbers, and no other interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pook.
No other interests, but I have had the same emails as everybody else.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Yes, I've received emails on item 8 and item 9. In regard to item 9, I did attend quite some time ago a meeting with planning officers and Devon County Council officers.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner.
Apologise. Yes, I would declare an interest with 2089 personal interest on the basis that my father and I, as a family member, were tenants of a farm for Clinton Devon Estates many years ago. So it will be that. And I will also declare an interest on 200995, as that member, the applicant for that would be of friends of mine. So I take that as a personal interest. So both for Shirley Shaw will be my ones would be personal interest. And I have also received emails and telephone conversations regarding applications 21504 for Otter St Mary, and consequently also I attended the site meeting for 2089 for the parish, for the district council, which a few of us did, and I've also received sort of emails and letters regarding that application as well.
Thank you. Councillor Whibley.
Hi there. No interests other than being in receipt of the emails.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
I've received the same emails as has already been mentioned for numbers 8 and 9. I also have a personal interest in 21504, number 9, in the context that we're discussing the Church of England school. I'm a member of the Humanists UK, which has a campaign agenda for the reform of the relationship between faith and schools, but it doesn't give rise to any predetermination on the issues in this application.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Wragg.
Yeah, same here. I've received a number of emails, quite a few emails actually, on the aforementioned applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Councillor Mike House. Sorry, I forgot to declare I have one son at King's School currently. So for the same one, item 9, I forgot to mention it earlier.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howe. Thank you. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency to discuss. Agenda item 6, confidential items, exempt items, there are none. So agenda item 7, appeal statistics, pages 12 to 19. Over to you, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. So only 2 appeal decisions on this agenda this month. So the first one you'll see is actually an appeal that was withdrawn by the appellant in relation to telecom mast in Aylesbury. We refused it on the basis of the visual impact of that mast, and following the start of the appeal, they've withdrawn that appeal. And the second item on the agenda there is one that was mentioned at the last committee in relation to Enfield Farm and the biodigester. Just again, happy to report that the inspector agreed with us and dismissed that appeal, which would have increased the amount of tonnage and crop throughput that could have been used in that facility. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was a long time coming, that result, wasn't it? Okay. Agenda item 8 then. This is a major application, 2089, major full application, 151 hectares of land within the parishes of East Budley, Budley Salterton, Otterton, from Limekiln Park car park to south of Frogmore House. That's on page 20. And I'd like to welcome the following speakers: Ian Blackwell, Margaret Yerrell, who I understand will be phoning in, Richard Bell, David Butler, Ian Smith, David Daniel, Sam Bridgewater, I think that's Dr. Sam Bridgewater, Caroline Chambers, Sam Scriven, Hayla Lass, and Mike Williams to the meeting. So over to you, Mr. Rose, to present your report, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So yes, as you said, this is a substantial change to the environment, covering 151 hectares of land from Budley up to East Budley and up to Otterton. So it's for the restoration of the floodplain, as you can see from the description of the development, that will create intertidal habitat, including new footbridges, realignment of South Farm Road, a new car park, and it's known as the Lower Otter Restoration Project. It's before members because the recommendation of approval is contrary to that of parish councils. And the scheme covers 3 areas of parish councils. Before I talk through the slides and the proposal in a little bit of detail, although I'm aware a number of members and people are aware of the detail of the scheme, we have had updated comments very recently from the CPRE. So you'll notice in the agenda report that they are raising concerns about the proposal, but we've had a further comment from them, which says that they've further reviewed the proposal, and on balance, they would rather the Lower Otter be in a natural state than its current man-made condition, and they are therefore now supportive of the project, subject to EDDC being satisfied. And I've also had a late letter of objection in relation to property off Granary Lane and concerns over land ownership and some dispute, which it's a civil matter, so not for us to be involved from a planning perspective. That letter has been passed to the applicant, and in fact they've already responded to say that they are satisfied with the land ownership arrangements from that part of the site. Before I go on, just to make note, you'll see from the report that there's support from the scheme from the Environment Agency, Natural England, the RSPB, Devon Wildlife Trust, and this is due to the potential of the improvement to the ecological environment that will be the outcome of this intertidal habitat, and also support from the World Heritage Site Jurassic Coast team from bringing the environment back to a natural state. But of course, you'll also notice in the report that as well as 290 or so letters of support for the proposal, there's 240 objection letters, which is a substantial number of letters, well, in support and opposed to the scheme. And you'll see from the report on page 34 the reasons why people are concerned about the application in terms of the need for the proposal, flood risk, impact on wildlife, impact on footpaths, increase in visitors, and I'll run through some of those issues. So the slide on the screen in front of you shows the area that the proposal covers. So it's right from the seafront here in the estuary, right up through Big Marsh, across South Farm Road, up to Big Marsh North, and then further up Little Marsh and Lower Otterton. So sizable area that runs up the valley, and the proposal is to restore the historic floodplain here. So the idea is to breach the banks that are currently in place as you go up this area of land, and therefore to allow flooding to occur more naturally. And as a result of that, it will create salt marshes and mudflats. And there's new connections and footpaths that will be proposed as part of that, and basically a new channel that runs all the way up through the site that allows this channel to flood, and then the area either side of it to flood when needed. And as part of the proposal, there's a new new South Farm road alignment and a new car park. So if I just run through those photos, so this is the large area of land that the proposal covers, all in the floodplain here from the river running up through the valley. And these are the photos of the existing. So this is looking back down the estuary towards the sea. So this is all of the area that's proposed to be covered by the proposal to be flooded. And again, further photos of the areas to be covered by this. And so here we get to each of the individual slides. So down at the estuary here, we have opening up of the bund, and then we have a new walkway put across the front. So this will allow the water to flow in and out of the site. And here we have the channel. So we've got this raised footway here that runs along to keep the national footway links in place, and then the water will run under this bridge area. And then you can see the channel that runs all the way up through the valley. And then we get up to this part of the site. This is a historic landfill area. Some of that landfill will be removed and covered to the benefit of the scheme. And then off to the side here, you can see there's a car park and more footways. And this is where the realigned road position will take place. And again, further photos up the valley. This is something I'll come back to. So yeah, further photos of the whole area that's to be covered by this. So it's a sizable area, and that's the spit at the moment at the front. So this was that historic landfill area I was talking about. So the existing South Farm Road runs along here, and it's proposed to be realigned on the line shown on the screen. This area of historic landfill will be taken out, majority out of the flooding area. And then you can see off to the side, we've got the new road alignment. So the old road is retained to keep access to those cottages. And then we've got the newer road alignment, which also includes a parking area and new footways to provide links. And then we've got some of the cross sections of the bridges that are proposed. So you can see the sort of span that's involved, and levels differences, and then the channel area created. That's the car parking area that I mentioned, and these next few photos are where that car park and that new access road is proposed to be created to come into the site, and then further up to cross the estuary, the watercourse. And then we have this ditch again running further up, all the way up through to the end of the site, and again with new footpaths proposed. So this will allow the water to flood in and out, and to create this tidal marsh area that the application is proposing. And again, you can see further photos there of the extent of land that's proposed to be covered and some of the levels. So it's a very sizable scheme. The site's in the open countryside. It's in the East Devon AONB. It's part of the cliffs at the front are part of the SSSI. It's also an estuary marine conservation area at the front and by the spit, and a World Heritage Site, coastal preservation area, and county wildlife site. So you can see the designations that are already on that site. And obviously there's local plan policies that cover this development, and also 3 neighbourhood plans from Budley, Salterton, Otterton and East Budley. So the purpose of the project is to manage the realignment of the estuary and provide this compensatory habitat for the wildlife. I suppose it's worth pointing out up front that if this doesn't happen, if there's no action is taken, then there would be continued or worsened flooding. So hopefully members are aware of flood events that have happened. Certainly the cricket club getting flooded on numerous occasions. So if this scheme doesn't happen, that will continue to happen, and the benefits of the scheme in terms of the habitat improvements wouldn't be secured. It's a £20 million plus scheme. If you're aware that there's funding of this from the EA due to the wildlife benefits being created here to help overwintering birds in the estuary, the ex-estuary that is. So there's habitat improvements, and there's also some of the money, approximately a third of it, is going to come from the EU, and that is time limited in terms of receipt of that money. So a decision is really needed at this committee to ensure that if a positive decision is made, they can draw down that funding from the EU. It's also worth me stating up front that this isn't proposed to be a tourist attraction, so there's no visitor centres. It's not comparable to the Seaton wetlands. There's not proposed to be visitor areas, bird highs, and for it to be an attraction in itself. But there will be, as you hopefully see from those slides, a significant physical and visual change to the area. Local plan policies seek to conserve the landscape and ecology, or conserve and enhance, and the proposal will enable the better management of the area, reuse the area or bring it back to its natural state. As I've said, the CPRE have said that's a benefit of the scheme. And there are many ecological benefits as defined in the application and highlighted in those comments from the EA, Natural England, RSPB and Devon Wildlife Site. So there's strong support for the benefit of the proposals and the improvements to the landscape and biodiversity that will result from this, but it will change the appearance and the function of this landscape. Just to mention some other issues that have been raised with regard to flooding, it's entirely within the flood zone of the River Otter. There's river flooding at the moment and coastal flooding, so the scheme is seeking to or will help to address those. Without intervention, as I've said before, as a result of climate change, this will result in increasing the number of breaches to this area at the moment, just naturally. So as climate change evolves, if nothing is carried out, then there'll be more and more breaching of the estuary embankments and more flooding, and therefore potentially, as we go forward, more risk to roads, houses and gardens. The scheme will result in the floodplain being inundated with water on a more daily basis. Hopefully you can see from the report and the application that no properties are considered to be in any worse flood risk as a result of this proposal. The new channels and works that are proposed will improve the fluvial flooding situation, and so the runoff from the river that lead into this area at the moment. There have been concerns regarding an impact on properties off Frogmore Road. The application proposes or assesses that there'll be less than a 5 centimetre increase in the height of the water levels in that area. But the environmental statement supporting the application does state that the monitoring of that area should be ongoing, because the exact impacts around those houses are not fully known at the moment. There will be improvements there to the river that will increase flood risk to those properties from the river and the watercourse there. But it is, given the concerns raised by those residents there, I am recommending, if members are going to approve permission, that we have an extra condition be added in relation to Frogmore Road to follow through that monitoring that's mentioned in the ES to ensure that that area and the impact on those residents is monitored going forward. And I know from speaking to the Environment Agency yesterday that they are going to be in the next few weeks having meetings with those residents on Frogmore Road, because I appreciate and they appreciate that they've got concerns about flood risk that might happen to those properties as a result of the scheme. The other area to mention in particular is Granary Lane. So the properties that are off Granary Lane, again, the scheme won't make the flood risk to those properties any worse. In fact, improvements to the outfall pipes will ensure better drainage, but some of the flooding that happens around some of the private gardens or areas on Granary Lane, it won't be any worse, but that may well continue. And remember that, as I said, that without these works, the current position will only get worse. With regard to biodiversity, there's long-term improvements here. There's more natural environment created, will be more sustainable. The intertidal habitat for overwintering birds is a big benefit of the scheme, and the reason why the Environment Agency are funding the proposal because of those wider benefits. And as I say, there's no visitor facilities that are proposed. There will be a number of inevitable loss of some trees and landscaping as the area floods and changes over time, but there's also improvements to the hedgerows and new planting and habitat proposed as part of the application. In terms of highway and parking, as I mentioned, there's the realignment of South Farm Road. It's a single track in places with parking off of it at the moment. Some of those informal lay-bys harm the wildlife in the wider area. And the new road and the new car park with up to 40 spaces will help to address that. And there's also a footpath proposed off South Farm Road to the junction of Granary Lane to ensure that those footpath links are retained. And the access for walkers will remain, and it's considered, it's expected that the main car park for those people that do want to walk the area will remain as Limekiln car park. And the car park that's proposed as development is seeking to mitigate the loss of the lawful parking that happens on South Farm Road. In terms of construction, there's a construction management plan that's been submitted with the application and conditions on that, and details and locations of storage compounds, and the timings of road closures and routes will need to be agreed with Devon County, but there's also conditions proposed on the Kemp so that we can control hours, constructions, routing, etc. And just on some other matters quickly, I know there's been concerns raised by a number of members of the public about the consultation exercises. There has been, for a number of years now, consultation by the applicant going forward. That started off as meetings, and then there's been subsequent consultation with the public. And obviously we, as part of this application, have consulted on the application, and that's considered to be to meet the requirements. There was concern raised about cliff erosion to the face of the properties that on Granary Lane that back onto the site. That's been assessed by the application and is going to be unlikely, and certainly if there is any erosion, it will be no worse and probably less worse than would happen if nothing happens, and that cliff face is more constantly in contact with water. I mentioned the landfill site. Water sports has been raised as a concern. It's not part of the application or proposal that this area becomes sort of managed water sports area, and that will be managed by Clinton Devon Estates to ensure that that doesn't become the case. So to conclude, there'll be significant change to the landscape here, but it will result in a more natural landscape, creation of new habitat, which is supported by a number of, or all of the consultee bodies on here. It's time limited in terms of this can happen because there's money from the EA in terms of the benefits to the area for the wildlife and the habitat creation and the EU money. The flood risk will be no worse. In fact, it will be improved in a number of cases. And as I said, if we do nothing, then the situation is likely to become worse over time given climate change. And there's no guarantee that any funding from the EU or anyone will be available at that time. So in light of those ecological benefits and other benefits around the proposal and the support from the consultees, we are, as officers, are recommending approval of the application. But I would, if we could, I would like if we could have, if members were to approve, an additional condition to cover that issue with the Frogmore Road residents that I mentioned, so that continuing monitoring of that area and reporting back to us. And we've had late further comments from the Environment Agency, who have requested conditions on a landscape and ecological management plan, habitat monitoring plan, and screening to a couple of footpaths to protect ecology. So if members were to approve the application, then I would recommend that those additional conditions be added. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I'm pleased that the meeting is going ahead now with the Frogmore Road residents and the Environment Agency, because that had been promised some time ago. It was hoped it would take place before or earlier, but at least it is going ahead. And there will be an opportunity, because I'm going to allow Mike Williams to be ask questions so that, you know, any fears might be allayed or addressed anyway. So we move now into the speakers and the objectors. And we have Ian Blackwell. I see you're there, Mr. Blackwell.
I am indeed, thank you, yes.
Yeah, you have 3 minutes and you will be advised 30 seconds into your 3 minutes. This applies to all the speakers. Before the end, 30 seconds, that your time is coming to an end. Speaking, that is, not, not physically. Okay then, would you like to start?
Well, thank you very much indeed, yes. As you've already observed, I'm living in Frogmore Road, and our observations really are concerned with our concerns about the flood risk assessment, which are twofold. Firstly, the flood risk assessment was published online last September, but it wasn't until mid-November that surveyors arrived in Frogmore Road and indeed in our driveway to take appropriate measurements. So the flood risk assessment, and from our viewpoint, is not fully informed, and its validity must be questioned. The second point we'd make about the flood risk assessment is it takes no account of the 2010 Haycock report on Lower Otter River flooding. Haycock showed floodwater getting into the Frogmore Road area through 2 culverts in the railway embankment. On average, this occurs every 2 years, and we've had a grandstand view of this for the past 26. The second route for floodwater is when Otterton Bridge cannot cope with the downflow, and water surges westwards and then south across the road east of Sleep Cottage, cutting Otterton off. Now, Haycock addresses this problem, but it's not been mentioned in the restoration project, where planning doesn't extend to the bridge. The net result of this is that we in Frogmore Road get flooding coming from both sides of the railway embankment. We have to sit and watch and wait until low tide at Ottermouth allows the floodwaters levels to fall. High tide bars the outflow. We've also got concerns about the plan to remove the aqueduct, which takes Budleaf Brook directly into the Otter. Little Marsh lies at the narrowest point of the floodplain. During flooding, the water backs up here, as it will naturally do at a choke point, but the aqueduct ensures that the brook's water drains below the choke point and doesn't add to this congestion. Removing the aqueduct and draining the brook into Little Marsh, as the project proposes, presents 2 problems. Firstly, brook water now adds to that already backing up in Little Marsh. And secondly, there's a proposal to put a 3rd culvert into the railway embankment, which gives yet another route for water to flow westwards into the fields and
30
on
seconds remaining.
into the Frogmore Road properties. Our concerns go further. Haycock, I beg your pardon, proposed dealing with flooding issues before the sea inundates the valley. The project puts it on the back burner. Apart from not mentioning Haycock, LORP doesn't use the word maintenance, nor does it consider what is to happen once the project's in place. The Otter is a furred up artery.
3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Now we move to Margaret Yarrell. Is Mrs. Yarrell on the phone?
Mrs. Yarrell, you'll need to do *6 because I had to mute you.
Hello.
Welcome to the meeting, Mrs. Yarrell. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. This proposal concerns a major scheme with unpredictable and irreversible changes. Notification in Budleigh was restricted to those living on the eastern side of Granary Lane. Rumours that it is a done deal have been widespread. I trust that this is not the case. Representations to EDDC were made in the ratio 2-to-1 against until November the 11th, when some organisations appealed to their countrywide membership for support. So the figures before you give a distorted picture of local opinion. The substance of the proposal is largely inaccessible, some 180 pages with cross-reference and additional reports. How many councillors, organisations or residents can have had the time and energy to read and digest its contents. Instead, a simple image of the scheme has been projected as a champion of biodiversity and a remedy for catastrophic flooding due to climate change, against which immediate action must be taken. The latter is a very good example of scaremongering. What is clear from the detail is that the proposal will have a devastating impact. The applicants accept that the scheme will adversely affect the biodiversity and marine ecology of the Otter Valley. They foresee that a long list of species, including some protected by law, such as owls, will be lost to the valley forever. The freshwater habitats will be dug up and replaced by mudflats. Once the major construction works have ended, a new habitat might develop after about 5 years. Far from being free to meander through its floodplain, the River Otter will be confined. The increased tidal flow at its mouth is likely to erode the eastern part of Budley's Pebble Beach, raising the risk of sea flooding. These actions are in direct contravention of EDDC's own local plan, in particular strategies 5, 47, 7, 21 and 46. To ignore or override them would not only undermine the plan and the democratic processes which gave rise to it, but also set a precedent for the future. The applicant admits the scheme is not intended to reduce flood risk. Data from the Met Office and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change show no evidence that climate change is having any effect on the Otter estuary. A glaring omission is a risk assessment of the consequences of the scheme. Any assertion of little or no risk is not sufficient to avoid potential harm and respect the precautionary principle to which public authorities are accountable. Even our drinking water supply could be affected. Salt water can impregnate the aquifers for Budley, as could all manner of poisonous substances if the unlined landfill site leaks. This is a serious public health matter. Remediation and clarification of whether the risk is low or medium are not enough. Access to an unpolluted supply of fresh water is fundamental, and any threat should be taken very seriously. If you have even the slightest doubt about the safety of this project, as well as its future impact on the citizens you represent, you should vote against it.
Thank you, Mrs. Yerrill. And I'd like to add that members of this committee, not all of them, went on a site visit and spent over 2 hours there looking at South Palm Road and from Limekiln car park as well. So, and all members of the committee will have thoroughly read the agenda reports as well. So just to reassure you on that point. Okay, now we have Richard Bell. I see Richard Bell is there. Mr. Bell?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. Today I want to draw your attention to the flood risk in Frogmore Road, East Budley, and parts of the East Budley adjacent to the Budley Brook. We have raised concerns both through the planning application process and directly with the Environment Agency that the law scheme should not increase flood risk but reduce it. So far, we've had no explanation from the EA as to why the computer flood model shows no increased flood risk. For those of us living near the river know that at the times of fluvial floods, the river spills into Little Marsh and Big Marsh and surrounding areas. These are the very areas that will be inundated with tidal flow under the scheme proposals. Spring tides will fill the Little and Big Marshes. If simultaneously a 1 in 100-year fluvial flood occurs, where will the extra water go to? Logic and simple hydraulics dictate it will back up the valley, increasing the flood risk on Frogmore Road and the area adjacent to the Budley Brook. You've been told in a previous presentation how serious fluvial flooding can be in Frogmore Road, and it's a major concern how simultaneous fluvial and newly introduced tidal floods will impact. We are currently still awaiting an explanation from the Environment Agency as to how this simultaneous flood scenario will affect our properties and what solutions they now propose to mitigate flood risk. With no progress so far with the EA, although they've suggested a meeting now on the 19th of January, the question to you today is, how have you as a planning authority scrutinised the flood risk issue with the EA? The advice from your planning officer seems to accept the EA's modelling without any independent scrutiny. Your flood risk is a major issue for this application, and the practical concerns which have been raised need to be addressed. This application's flood risk assessment warrants independent scrutiny, without which it's questionable whether you are able to demonstrate that the planning function has been fully discharged. It cannot be appropriate to accept the EA's assertion that their internal EA peer group review is actually independent. I would ask you, therefore, please, to apply two conditions to any approval. They should require the applicant to submit the flood risk assessment to independent scrutiny and to seek agreement with Frogmore Road residents as to the amelioration or mitigation work that will be required now as part of this
30
scheme,
seconds remaining.
rather than reliance on monitoring and an adaptive approach, i.e. suck it and see, as suggested in the flood risk assessment report. Both conditions should be satisfied before any breaching of banks takes place. We in Frogmore Road need answers and solutions that will protect us from increased flood risk. We're relying on the planning process to provide that protection. Thank you for my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Next, we have Mr. David Butler. Are you there, Mr. Butler? I can't see you.
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, you have 3 minutes then.
You're being recommended to approve this application because the only alternative option is to do nothing, which will lead to continued chronic flooding of the estuary. Yet there's always been another option, which is to resume proper planned preventive maintenance of the estuary, which has been neglected over many years. The Environment Agency, in a technical response to consultation, have emphasised that it is not a flood event scheme and does not aim to reduce the current flood risk. You are being recommended to approve it and accept responsibility for the risk caused by large-scale flooding. The sheer scale and complexity of the scheme must surely give you cause to pause before reaching a decision. It has strategic consequences for the whole of East Devon. It will irreversibly change the character of the Otter estuary and the Shingle Spit at Otter Head. The scheme is supported by Clinton Devon Estates and by environmental and conservation bodies, but you have a prior responsibility to local parish councils and individual ratepayers directly impacted by the scheme to protect the infrastructure of Budleigh Salterton, East Budleigh and Otterton from major adverse impacts, and residential properties in Granary Lane and particularly Frogmore Road from flooding and permanent damage. Time may be running out on the availability of EU capital funding support for the scheme, but rushing to reach a decision without taking sufficient time properly to examine all the facts can lead to risks of adverse outcomes and unintended consequences. The recommended approval conditions are not so far sufficient to manage the probability and impact of all the risks. It will cause a wide range of risk scenarios around flooding, erosion, public access to footpaths, pressures on local parking and road infrastructure, contamination leaching from the historic landfill site, mosquitoes, and significantly critical path conflicts with the FabLink Internet Connector project. An environmental impact assessment methodology
30 seconds remaining.
And flood risk assessment modelling are reported as concluding that the likelihood of these risks is largely minimal and their consequences are unlikely to present any significant issues. These appear to be somewhat complacent conclusions, lacking any real-world credibility. In order to comply with government best practice, the Environment Agency must take account of the highest, most credible worst-case scenarios in assessing the likelihood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that the committee are taking all these concerns very seriously. Next, we have Mr. Ian Smith.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. As the applicant's flood risk assessment acknowledges, climate change is unpredictable. It should be dealt with in stages, reviewing the actual effects of previous stages before implementing any further stage. If the project is to go ahead at all, it isn't all or nothing now, as has been alleged. It should initially be restricted to work on and south of South Farm Road, as is understood to have been the original intention. Indeed, the project's own website features a map of this southern area only. The other elements should be mothballed in case of future need. This references option E of the Haycock report. The first stage would cover the project's major works, providing 18 hectares of intertidal habitat to discharge the environmental agency's obligations, relocating the cricket club, improving access to South Farm and the cottages, and securing the former refuse site. This reduced scope would preserve grazing land for Poolhays Farm and protect the freshwater environment for trees and other flora and fauna and the aquifers north of South Farm Road. Crucially, it would also eliminate the flood risk of adding the tide and the insane northern U bend in Budley Brook into what is already a level 3 freshwater flood risk area adjacent to East Budley housing. The money saved could be invested in long overdue maintenance work. Instead of removing healthy trees, the dying trees that disrupt the flow of the Otter could be regularly removed and damage caused to its banks regularly repaired. This maintenance would also protect the crucial West Bank path from Otterton to Budley Salterton, which is by far the most used in the valley north of South Farm Road, but is largely, perhaps deliberately, sidelined in this application. It was impassable on at least 6 occasions last year through flooding caused by failure to repair a single breach in the riverbank just north of Clammer Bridge. Last February, river flooding alone came within 100 metres across a flat field of our house and neighbours' houses. Returning to the flood risk assessment, it forecasts in Appendix A map without climate change that an extreme tide alone would reach the same place. Add river flooding, which you've seen in Ian Blackwell's photographs, when, as will happen, heavy rain and high tides coincide, and the results will be catastrophic. To conclude, I would not expect any councillors to vote to bring the sea from over 2 kilometres away to within metres of their homes. So please don't vote to do that to our homes by giving permission for this unnecessarily and dangerously overextended project. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, now we move to those in support. David Daniel.
I strongly support this project. That's not to say that I will find the transition easy. The scenery, familiar to me from my childhood, would change dramatically. A man-made and much loved bucolic landscape will be lost, but another, more natural one gained. The transition process will be disruptive. But in my lifetime, I've seen the pastures reclaimed 200 years ago become waterlogged, rank, and overgrown by rushes. I'm old enough to have seen the 2 massive breaches in the embankments that occurred below White Bridge in the 1950s. I've also watched how overtopping of these banks and flooding of the cricket pitch have become more frequent in the past 20 years. Now, there have been a number of significant breaches in the past decade. Indeed, a new hole had to be plugged twice as recently as the December spring tides just above White Bridge. The committee could choose the easy route and do nothing. In this case, at some stage in the not too distant future, the artificial earth banks constructed 200 years ago will fail yet again during a storm surge or through flooding, both of which are becoming more frequent and intense due to climate change. The breach in 2018 was just one spring tide away from catastrophe. Next time, we might not be so lucky. Overnight, we could lose the footpath connecting the Limekiln car park to White Bridge, which is the most heavily used footpath in Devon. South Farm Road would become tidal, if not swept away, and the old refuse tip exposed to tidal erosion. And this situation could easily become irrecoverable. It's far better, in my opinion, having found the funding, to preempt this event and manage change in a considered and controlled way. It confronts us in East Devon with the uncomfortable reality of climate change, perhaps rather earlier and more abruptly than most of us would have wished. It's not very comfortable. But in my considered opinion, based on a lifetime's observation, the status quo, regrettably, is no longer sustainable. We simply can't afford to kick the can down the road.
Have you finished, Mr.
I
Daniel?
finished, yes.
Oh, well done. Very succinct. Thank you very much. Next, we have Sam Bridgewater. Is it Dr. Sam Bridgewater?
Thank you very much. Clinton Devon Estates has been in existence for over 700 years, and it remains in existence because it's constantly adapted. And we know we must now adapt to climate change. We manage our business by assessing and managing risk, and climate change is now amongst the greatest risks on our register. It should also be considered the greatest risk that society currently faces. Nowhere is the impact more keenly felt than in the Otter Valley in East Devon, which lies at the interface between the land and the rising sea. It's our honest belief that there are only two alternatives for the valley's future. The first is the current proposition, a managed transition to intertidal habitat with community assets protected to the best of our ability and species impacts and habitat losses mitigated. The second is an unmanaged transition to poorly drained habitat with none of these protections in place. As a landowner, our preference is for proactive rather than reactive change. Our aim is to adapt the Otter Valley to the current and future challenges climate change will bring and attain more sustainable management. Our objective is not to create a new tourist attraction, hence the low-key provision of visitor infrastructure in the proposals. Our objective with parking, for example, is to improve the quality and sustainability of that which already exists and not to scale it up. We accept that the changes to the landscape proposed here are highly significant and amongst the biggest that East Devon has seen in recent decades. However, we also believe that the natural environment will be improved by the scheme. Evaluations done by independent ecologists following nationally accepted gold standard protocols for undertaking such assessments have shown this to be true. The support for this scheme from environmental NGOs has been very strong indeed. The existing landscape of the Lower Otter Valley is beautiful currently. It is familiar and it is much loved. However, it isn't natural. The habitats aren't particularly rare, nor the wildlife of unusually high value. Conversely, the intertidal habitat creation of mudflat and salt marsh we are proposing is more natural for the location, is nationally rare, and is of the highest wildlife value. It also sequesters carbon and can adapt to climate change. The existing habitats are unable to do so. In summary, we recognise this is a very bold initiative, but we believe that these times demand that we are bold.
20 seconds remaining.
Thank you. Society must look forward rather than backwards, and we must confront climate challenges head on. We very much hope that the committee will approve this scheme. We believe it will strengthen East Devon's environmental offer and demonstrate that it is possible for society to adapt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Caroline Chambers.
Hi there. Thank you for the chance to talk. I'm talking on behalf of my parents who live on Frogmore Road at the cottage, but also I have a job I'm currently managing a project on restoration. So I have vested interest on both sides, which is why I'm a supporter, but on condition of certain mitigation measures. Understand that there could be an 18 centimetre rise in flooding from the tidal and fluvial 1 in 200 plus sea level rise along Frogmore Road, adjacent to the properties there. But I think Chris Rose said earlier that's been amended to 5 centimetres, but my understanding is that's the model tolerance and not the new flood level. So that would still bring it down to between 13 and 23 centimetres increase. My understanding is that there's also an increase of groundwater east of Frogmore Road, and I don't believe the two models have been aligned together so that increased saturation from the groundwater is taken into consideration in the fluvial flooding. There's another further consideration with the change in the geomorphology over time of the estuary, where we get a wider breach across the mouth of the river, and this can increase the penetration of tidal water, and that has not been taken into consideration in the models. So it's possible that that 18 centimetres plus the possible extra 5 centimetres of model tolerance could actually be higher if you consider the new geomorphology. So it's very technical, but that's a really important point to make. I understand that the National Planning Policy Framework, Policy 157, requires projects to apply a sequential risk-based approach, take account of current and future impacts of climate change, and avoid flood risk to people and property. This indicates not a reactive approach to mitigation, but a proactive one. And that's something that I'm asking for, as are the rest of the residents, I believe. Excuse me. I'm concerned about the money. If this isn't done at the start alongside the project, if that money will still be there. So it needs to be done with the project, and also there needs to be money for future maintenance of mitigation measures, which I would consider best as a bank along Frogmore Road. I think in many schemes of this scale, this is a pioneer project, and there's plenty of risks. We do not know exactly what's going to happen, so caution should be taken. Residents' property should be protected as far as possible, whether that's a planned stage with the flooding or ensuring correct mitigation. And projects of this size, so for offshore wind farms, often give back to communities to keep everyone happy. And I think this is a project where the community needs to be kept happy and protected to show value of the residents as well.
3 minutes is ended.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Sam Scriven. Sam Scriven there.
Here I am. Hello.
Yes, hello. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I am speaking specifically in reference to the impact the Lower Otter Restoration Project will have on the Dorset and East Devon Coast World Heritage Site, otherwise known as the Jurassic Coast. Budleigh Salterton Beach forms a part of the outstanding universal value of the Jurassic Coast. In other words, the quality of the beach and shingle spit helped win the Dorset and East Devon Coast World Heritage status in 2001. As a result, it was incorporated within the boundaries of the site. Ongoing natural processes are key to maintaining World Heritage status everywhere on the Jurassic Coast. And this point is central to why we consider the Lower Otter Restoration Project to be of overwhelming benefit to the World Heritage Site. The eastern end of Budleigh Beach, the Shingle Spit, is an active landform, naturally evolving and reshaping itself in response to tides, storms, and the flow of the River Otter. The Lower Otter Restoration Project is explicitly about returning the river system behind the Shingle Spit to a more natural state. Once complete, we will witness the Shingle Spit evolve in turn as it responds to these more natural conditions. The prospect of that, for us, is incredibly exciting. The improved connectivity supports site management policy and positively impacts the World Heritage Site in 3 ways. It benefits the outstanding universal value of the Jurassic Coast. It improves its functional setting, that is the way the natural processes link the site to its wider landscape. And it improves the way people experience and understand the world-class attributes of the site. The reality of the Jurassic Coast, recognised in its management provisions, is a default position of potential compromise, as coastal communities understandably seek to alter natural processes like erosion in order to defend themselves. It is rare indeed for a major project like this to improve rather than harm the World Heritage Site, which is another reason why we embrace it. This site-wide perspective is something we collectively are asked to take by UNESCO, where impacts on any part of the World Heritage Site should be regarded as impacts on the whole. This is the case where a potential threat to the World Heritage Site is considered, I recommend to you now that you consider it again here where there is a potential benefit to be gained. Not only is this in line with agreed Jurassic Coast management policy, but it is essential in safeguarding the future of
30 seconds
the
remaining.
heritage asset. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scriven. Next we have Halo Lass.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm a chartered civil engineer, and before I retired, I spent my whole career in the water industry, which was as much about environmental aspects as about hard engineering. Part of my career involved assessment of climate change and its effect on all aspects of water, from the quality of supply to the stability of structures. I'm also vice chair of the Otter Valley Association, and in that capacity, I have been a representative on the technical steering group for the Lower Otter Restoration Project. I'm sure that, like me, most of the OVA members know and love the Otter Estuary and enjoy walking, wildlife, and the scenery. We'd love it to stay as it is. But as a professional, I understand that change is inevitable, and it's increasingly inevitable, and it's accelerating with climate change. So we cannot maintain it as it is now forever. This change could happen suddenly, tomorrow, next week, next year. And it would be catastrophic because it would be unmanaged. So the LORP project offers a unique opportunity to manage these inevitable changes. So rather than an unmanaged disaster recovery, for which there would apparently be no funding anyway, this would be a better provision for a totally managed restoration to a more natural environment. So there will be changes, and there'll be some mess made in making the changes, but as a project, the LORP delivers significant benefits for both the wildlife and the people in the Lower Otter Valley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lass. And I would like to thank all the speakers who've made such valuable contributions in informing the committee as to what decision they will reach today. It certainly is not a done deal, as has been suggested. We move on now to Mike Williams, the applicant. Mike Williams, are you there?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. The Environment Agency's vision, which fully aligns with the UK government's recent policy statement on flood and coastal erosion management, is for a nation ready for and resilient to flooding and coastal change today, tomorrow, and to the year 2100. The Lower Otter Restoration Project plays a part in delivering that vision for East Devon. Globally, it's acknowledged that climate change is happening and that we must adapt to it. Current forecasts of the likely impact over the next 100 years are for sea level rise of between 1 and 1.35 metres, and for peak river flows to increase by over 80%. In addition, we will see increased storminess, causing bigger waves and tidal surges. On the 16th of December 2020, the morning high tide was almost across the riverside footpath upstream of South Farm Road. The Environment Agency had just repaired another leak through the embankment. It's simply a matter of time before the embankments, which do not protect any residential properties, fail, leading to uncontrolled flooding of South Farm Road, the Cricket Club, and most of Big Marsh. The old domestic refuse tip would be exposed to erosion, and the risk to South West Water's assets increased. Much of the work done in preparing this application has focused on how best to create a more sustainable future for the Lower Otter Valley in a well-managed way. Several of the solutions, relocation of the Cricket Club, raising South Farm Road, and rerouting the sewage outfall, for example, may only happen as a result of this project, with the time-bound benefit of European funding reducing the cost to the public purse. We believe that we have overcome each of the several technical hurdles that we have encountered. The application is supported by a highly detailed environmental statement, which has been independently reviewed by the relevant sections of the Environment Agency to ensure compliance. Flood risk under a range of different scenarios has been thoroughly assessed and found to reduce slightly under all but the most extreme future conditions when there is a marginal increase in one location. There has been some criticism of our approach to consultation in the unusual circumstances caused by the pandemic. The evidence is that many more people have visited our website and looked at the information provided than would have attended a public exhibition. We've worked very hard at engaging widely over the last 7 years and have provided the committee with the details of this. We are of the firm belief that this project, while undoubtedly causing great change, is one that local communities and all of East Devon should recognise as an opportunity to be grasped now while it remains possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to keep you there, Mr. Williams, to answer any questions, which I'm sure there will be some. And also,
Chairman, may I just say that you may need to address some of those questions to Mr. Dart, who is able to provide you with an independent view from the Environment Agency.
Can you explain that? An independent view from the Environment Agency?
So I am the Environment Agency's senior user for the project and effectively the client for the project. Mm. Simon Dart is an officer in the Flood and Coastal Risk Management part of the Environment Agency and is part of the section which has independently reviewed the flood risk assessment.
Thank you for that. That explains my query. Thank you. Now, I'll bring in the ward members and then we'll go to questions. So first, Councillor Alan Dent.
Thank you, Chair. The concept of breaching the River Otter embankment, Big Bank and Little Bank to restore a historic floodplain, thus creating an intertidal salt marsh, mudflats and freshwater habitat at both Big and Little Marshes, is imaginative, far-sighted and generally welcome. Along with pretty well all of the expert consultees, I support this initiative, but with certain caveats. Our role as ward members is to listen to the concerns of our residents and to do our best to see that such concerns are fully addressed. Mm. At both national and local level, we have all accepted that we face a looming crisis from the effects of climate change and rising sea levels. The District Council already put aside funds to start our own contribution in mitigating both climate change and also to promote more and more the use of green energy. The Lower Otter Valley has a history of flooding and plans are already underway to relocate the Budley Cricket Club, which has suffered severe flooding for a number of years. Only 2 years ago, the raised footpath running from Limekiln Car Park to White Bridge was breached during the storm and expensive repairs were needed to bring it back into service while saving the cricket club from catastrophic flooding. The footpath, and to a less extent the footpath on the western side of Otter Valley, are much loved by local people, by bird watchers and dog walkers. One very encouraging aspect of the proposed project is to raise both these footpaths, which will make them resilient to future potential floods and remain available for walkers. The proposals will also ensure the cliffs under the gardens in Granary Lane will be safeguarded from erosion. Some of these local concerns that have been raised focus on 4 or 5 main issues, most of which we've heard. Firstly, the risk of further flooding to Frogmore Road in East Budley. The road and properties along it have experienced flooding in the past, and even now large puddles form in the road whenever there's heavy rain. I note that the risk assessments state that with the proposed works, there will be a very low risk of flooding in the future. This must be, and it's been discussed already, a condition that ensures this is thoroughly reassessed and assurance given to the local residents that their properties will be safe and secure in the future. And I note the condition, the additional condition for monitoring is absolutely essential. Some concerns have also been raised about the removal of the aqueduct and realignment of the Budley Brook. To me, this seems a sensible option, and along with the raised footpaths around Little Marsh, this should be an effective long-term solution. Another concern has been that this project will attract additional visitors, which in turn will place a strain on car parking. From what I understand, the mudflat and salt marsh environment will attract birds who are overwintering. That's when keen bird watchers will be visiting, not during the normally busy summer season. On top of this, the very welcome upgrade to South Farm Road and the closure of the old road means there will actually be a reduction in the existing number of parking spaces, even with the new car park. I do understand that visitors to the site will be encouraged to use the Lime Kiln car park by judicious and well-signed signage. I ask that our officers look again at this to see if more parking spaces are indeed needed and that the necessary signage is properly conditioned. There has also been considerable concern about the impact construction work and associated traffic will have on existing footpaths and local narrow roads. I note that there are conditions covering both these aspects, and as a responsible council, we must ensure that these conditions are enforced. So in summary, the areas of concern I'm bringing to the committee's attention focus on suitable conditions to cover flood risk, particularly for Frogmore Road, car parking at the end of South Farm Road, a construction and management protocol, traffic management during and after construction, footpath accessibility at all times. On balance, I feel this is a welcome long-term project which addresses the issues of rising seawater levels and the consequent risk of unmanaged flooding. It also provides new habitats for a range of wildlife, which in turn can only be a benefit to our visitor and local economies. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me the time to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Dent. Next, we have Councillor Tom Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start and the clock starts ticking, I would like to declare what I think are relevant interests. I was until 2018 a member of the cricket club, which is one of the beneficiaries of this scheme. And for about 6 years, I was chair of the stakeholders group, which listened to stakeholders from wide sections of Budley, East Budley and Otterton community. And as was Halo, I was also invited to be a member of the technical steering group because of my role as chairing the stakeholders group. So having got that out of the way, you can start the clock. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
You're welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Right, you are. You've listened to a great deal about the future. I would like just to set the scene and remind councillors of where we are now. The land to the west of the river regularly floods, and that flood water remains in the area affected by these proposals for weeks, and in 2014 for months. Once the river water level drops, the flood water can't escape, so it lies there stagnating. South Farm Road does now become impassable at times, to the detriment of the residents of South Farm and the varied businesses which operate from the old South Farm buildings. The cricket club has become unviable, not just because the clubhouse floods every winter. The valiant club members deal with this by moving everything from ground floor to the roof space. More importantly, the ground itself remains waterlogged so that the season cannot begin. The cricket club plays a very important role in the life of Budley, East Budley and Otterton, not just for the weekend matches, but for the midweek community league where teams from other local organisations play. On Friday evenings, the club becomes the most successful youth club in the area and encourages youngsters, boys and girls of all ages to play sport and provides training and practice for a number of youth teams. The predicted rise in sea level indicates that these problems will worsen. The long-term viability of South Farm Road and the cricket club will not be assured unless this project proceeds. The project also involves the improvement of protection to the old rubbish tip. Other benefits include the raising and hardening of the path to the west behind Granary Lane. This will provide a year-round accessible path for walkers of all ages and abilities. At the moment, this path is often impassable to all but the most sure-footed and physically able. This will also improve the protection to the cliffs behind the Granary Lane homes. There are other concerns well expressed by Councillor Dent. but one of the most common ones that I've heard in my regular walks along the seafront is a fear about the increased tourism that this project will attract. I think these concerns have been heightened this summer because of people staying at home, kids not at school, and staycations. Budley, Salterton Beach, particularly this end of the town, has been absolutely massively busy. And it has been very difficult for residents due to inconsiderate parking and greatly increased traffic. The added attraction of the project will be in the autumn, winter and early spring by the arrival of migratory birdlife, so should have a negligible impact on the regular tourists who come to our lovely beach. There will be slightly reduced parking on the east of White Bridge. The fact is that cars should not be there now. This is an area of special scientific interest, which over the years has been damaged by vehicles driving carelessly off the road surfaces and spoiling the verges and the habitat. I am very concerned about the temporary problems high levels of heavy traffic will pose during the construction stage, and ask that a route be agreed and be enforceable to keep heavy plant and vehicles carrying road construction materials off the narrow roads around Budley or through Kersbrook, Yettington and East Budley. This is an exciting project, which when is all said and done, is restoring the area, the environment, to what it was before man intervened to create the artificial landscape we now have. And it will additionally go to some way to mitigate the future damage which has resulted from human actions. The big but broader picture advantage is that the project will deliver a significant area of quality tidal salt marsh, a habitat that elsewhere is sadly diminishing. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Now, it's not on the schedule, but I'd like to invite Councillor Jeff Young to speak. Councillor Young, are you there? Yes, I can see
yes,
you. Could you explain your title, please?
Yes, I'm Coast, Country and Environment Portfolio Holder for East Devon District Council.
Okay. I don't know how many minutes. Mrs. Shaw, can you advise 3 or 5?
I'll be as quick as I can.
I would advise 3 minutes, but yes, as quick as you can.
Yeah.
Right.
3 minutes.
I hope the works 200 years ago and other historic ventures provide us with a hard lesson. Don't mess with nature, because in the end, nature wins, we lose. The success of the Lower Otter Restoration Project is not only important to East Devon, but important internationally. If we do not go ahead with this project, a similar project in France will probably not proceed, as the European funding is tied together. Climate change is a recognised fact, and we in East Devon, with our very short river catchments and eroding coastline, are well aware of the effects our changing climate is already affecting our rivers and coastline. What are the facts? Fact: Exeter and Estuary recently had £30 million investment in flood protection, and Exmouth is in the middle of further multi-million pound improvements. Fact: why is the intertidal area diminishing? That's because the man-made solid barriers are not moving landward, but being strengthened, and more low tides are not as low as they used to be. This results in a gradual reduction. It has nothing to do with the building of more houses or extra profits for developers, which is referred to by some of the opponents. Fact: the Napoleonic concept of providing a navigational channel, creating extra agricultural land and restricting flooding in the Lower Otter totally failed, and nature will eventually take the area back. Fact: therefore, if we allow nature to do its thing, we will lose the agricultural land, lose the footpaths, lose the cricket ground, and most importantly, allow salt water to ingress into the old waste tip. Whoever thought of putting a waste tip in the Lower Otter? Fact: The funding, thanks to working with our European neighbours and funding made available because of intertidal losses on the ex-estuary, allows the Environment Agency to carry out this project to protect the existing rights of way, protecting the leaching of the waste tip and move the cricket ground. Fact, this funding is ring-fenced, specifically for providing intertidal habitat, and it is, and if it's not spent in East Devon, it will provide funding elsewhere, and the ongoing maintenance and management of this area will be down to continual local funding. Fact, this project will springboard East Devon into being a leader into nature-based solutions to reduce flood and coastal erosion risk. And we now start work with local landowners through the Elms project. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Well, we've had some very interesting contributions from some very knowledgeable people here today. And I hope that that will help members in their decision making. Now I'm going to open up for questions to Mr. Dart. Is he there? Can't see him.
Good morning, Chair. With your permission, would you like me to explain my role in the agency and what I've done over the past decades?
Yes,
Good morning,
please. Everyone. That would be helpful.
Okay. My role is that I work in the flood risk team in Devon and Cornwall. I comment on planning applications, strategic plans, local plans, and I also permit works on watercourses. I don't promote flood defence schemes. I'm quite happy to tell managers in the Environment Agency that are doing something wrong, and I have done, and I have not issued permits, but I also stand up for residents and the natural environment. As I said, it's UK PLC I stand up for. I consider whether developments from housing developers all the way down to wildlife schemes, whether they have an impact or a negative impact on flood risk in the areas. So we comment on planning applications and we provide that advice to the council so that you can make a informed decision. The reason I'm here today, or been asked to do today, is just to clarify any technical points the councillors or yourself may have in some of the arguments and in the technical documents. I'm not here to promote the scheme or to promote an objection to it. It's purely to better help you understand the information that you have been given. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that then, Mr. Dart, could you respond to the request for mitigation measures made by Caroline Chambers, please?
Okay, yeah. I think there's a lot of confusion that I've seen of the objection notes of what the scheme is intended to do. This scheme is not a normal flood defence scheme to defend property. It is there to catch up with climate change and provide wildlife habitat. All the properties currently are at risk of flooding, be it from the River Otter, from the sea, or from the minor watercourses that come to the area. There are no new properties that are going to have an increased risk to them by this scheme. Yes, there are some changes in water levels predicted by the modelling. I won't go too technical into that, but we have considered the impacts of both river and tidal flooding at the same time, current risk as well as future flood risk under different climate change scenarios. So in Frogmore Road, it is predicting that there could be some minor changes in the depth of flooding in the road during some very large storms in about 100, sometime in the future, about 100 years' time, not for current flood risk. But there is no increased risk to property. And that's the key thing here. Yes, I don't care if a road floods because my main duty is to stop property and people from flooding. We, the Environment Agency, have a duty to ensure that we look at all properties in Devon and throughout the Great Britain of their flood risk and how climate change is going to affect that. It's only very recently that it's changed that we can start considering the effects of future flooding on our sort of analysis and our justification of where we can do schemes to protect properties. So we continue to look at that. So the mitigation measures in Frogmore Road will be under our normal duties and don't need to be applied to this planning permission, because this scheme is not increasing flood risk to properties. Therefore, under planning sort of legislation and normal rules, they do not have to compensate for the impacts they're having. In fact, I think as one of the speakers said, in some conditions, this scheme is actually improving the flood risk, or certainly vastly shortening the length of flooding in the fields in front of the properties.
Thank you. Right, now I have some blue hands up. Councillor Skinner, if it's questions, please, questions only at this point. So unless you take your blue hand down, I'm assuming you're going to ask a question. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just say the blue hand's moved to a yellow hand, and I was struggling to get a blue hand, and I'm assuming everybody seems to have got a yellow hand up, so that seems to have changed, but I don't know when that happened or why. Yes, and my question is to, and I suppose it's to Mr. Dart, if I may. What we've heard is, and there's quite a lot I do want to talk about, but just to aim the question, what we've heard a lot of is people quite naturally, residents, people who live in the area, in trying to understand whether or not their houses and the risk of their housing, that they're likely to get a flood risk. And that's a really serious issue. I thank you very much for the comments that you were making earlier, and that I see that this the comments that you answered about flood risk, that it's not increasing risk. But I wonder if you could elaborate a little more on one or two, and particularly Mr. Blackwell and Mr. Bell, who actually, as public speakers, who were really concerned about this risk, because this is something we really need to get over, or certainly understand. And it's what risk other houses are, and if you could add just a little bit more weight to that to put people's minds at risk, because I could fully understand why they would want to know that this was going to be a scheme that was going to work well into the future and not put their properties at risk.
Okay, thank you for that. I think as I said, the issue is that people are already at risk today. We could get a storm a couple of weeks down the road that floods these properties, as they have been in the past. And I think, as one of the speakers put out, he remembers flooding way back in the 1950s of these embankments breaching. And in a certain size storm event, so that's the River Otter, say in 1979 or 97, the rural banks are overwhelmed, so the floodplain floods. Now, climate change, that's only going to get worse. And that's not just for the River Otter, it's also for the watercourse that comes down through East Budley. That already floods properties, that's going to get worse. This scheme is not trying to solve that flood risk. We have looked at East Budley in the past, and we looked at it. We said, well, okay, these properties at risk. We've got lots of records of what happens there during a flood event. What we're trying to do for this and all the communities in Devon is say, okay, when we have new modelling or new information, we look at it again and we see, okay, there are significant changes in flood risk. Therefore, can we get the money from central government to put in a flood defence scheme for the property, not for land, but just for the properties? So they are on our list. They are already at risk, but this proposal is not changing that risk at all. So therefore, it can't actually make a betterment to the project. We're not allowed to count that towards the cost of the project or anything like that. The government funding rules won't allow us to do that, but it doesn't mean that we won't continue to look at it in the past. And I think when we look at the sort of a monitoring regime, we will do that anyway. We're looking at, yes, have started work on Exeter and Exmouth and whatever, but we are beginning to look at, obviously, the smaller communities, because the rules have changed to allow us to target these small hamlets or small things with a more favourable way of doing things. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Desarum.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. My question is probably addressed to Mr. Rose. We've heard earlier Mr. Bell's 2 recommendations, and we've also heard the ward members' recommendations. So my question to Mr. Rose is, when we've actually come to debate this, would we be able to be in a position to incorporate Mr. Bell's 2 points that he raised as recommendations, and also the 2 ward members' recommendations that Councillor Dent and Councillor Wright put forward? So that is what I want to know, is when we've made our deliberations, are we able to add those 2 comments in? So I think it's not a question from Mr. Dart, but I think it's more a technical question for Mr. Rose to answer. So if I could get clarity on that, that'd be appreciated. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rose, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the 2 points from Mr. Bell were, one, that we get the FRA independently checked. That's already been checked by the independent person at the Environment Agency, and if you have concerns about that flood risk, then you shouldn't be approving the application. So it certainly shouldn't be a condition, but in any case, I don't think that will be needed or justified, because that's already taken place as part of the application. So the applicants, Clinton Devon Estates, have got their experts to look at it, and then Mr. Dart, as the independent person, has looked at that. So I don't think a condition on that would be justified. I did mention in terms of Frogmore Road that I was recommending an additional condition, and that really is because obviously there's due to be a meeting between the Environment Agency and those residents of Frogmore Road, and I wanted to ensure through a condition that if as an outcome of that meeting there are any changes to the scheme or new things involved that are needed to appease those residents that the EA agree with, and then we can cover that by way of condition. So we can put a condition on about that. I think the conditions from the ward members related to a Kemp, there's a condition on there about the routing of the vehicles, so there's already one proposed on that. And I think there was the second one was to do with signage to direct people to the Limekiln car park. And again, yes, if members feel that they would like to have details of that, then they could add a condition on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Key.
Chairman, this work that's going to be carried out, I appreciate all the objections that have come forward and also the fours of it. Now, I don't know whether a lot of you know that up on the Somerset levels, where they spent an awful lot of money and an awful lot of time, it has reduced the flooding to virtually nil. And I mean, that has done an incredible job. Years ago, farmers along the rivers used to excavate out the bottom of the river to keep the levels down. But the environment, in their wisdom, stopped that. And so consequently, this is why, I mean, the silt builds up in the bottom of the river and causes all this flooding. Now, here we have a project that hopefully is going to rectify this for this vulnerable area down there. And I think it is, looking at it, I've read it all through, I've seen the river, and I think this is the one way that is probably going to alleviate a lot of the flooding down there. I mean, one of the objectors did say, well, if they do nothing, it's going to get even worse. So I think what we've got to take in mind is the fact that here we are, we've got hopefully getting the money to do the good job, and therefore, you know, it would hopefully alleviate the flooding that they're getting down there, especially their cricket club. And so, I mean, I'm all in support of the application, with sort of some alterations to it slightly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Next, we have Councillor Joe Whibley.
Hi there. Yeah, this is a question. I guess it could be to either Mr. Dart or Mr. Rose. So we're talking about monitoring flood risk after this work has been done. other than monitoring, what provision is there to do to change things if there are unforeseen issues for the residents where flooding may or may not get worse? I appreciate it's been said that the flood risk will eventually, the flood risk is pretty much the same, but just is there any provision and any plans in place for if anything happens there that is unforeseen? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dart?
I'll take that if you like. In regards to monitoring, obviously we on a routine basis update our flood modelling, and this is what's changed in Lower Otter. Previously, we had some what we called generalised modelling, which covers the whole of the country, and with this project, we've allowed to come out with a more detailed model, which looks at current flood risk and future flood risk. And obviously, as time goes ahead, we use historical records. So we've updated this model using the flood events from 2012 and previous events. And as obviously things change, i.e. The climate change allowances changes, and I expect that the river allowances are going to be changing later this year from the scientific community, not from the Environment Agency. And also the fact that when local information changes or government guidance, we review these communities to have a look at it. And we do that on about a sort of 5-year cycle, shall I say, have a look at it, or when things happen. So we will be reviewing it along with all the communities in Devon, but there's monitoring's hard to do because unless you have a flood event, you don't know if things have changed or new guidance has changed. We can't update our figures. So it's not that we would definitely do this. It's a case of it's a standard practice to look at things like this, and this is what we will do for the community. But that's obviously subject to the meeting with the residents in case there are some sort of minor things that can be done to address some of their concerns.
Thank you. Councillor Ollie Davey, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a question for Mr. Dart as well. But first, this question has come from one of the public speakers. So I'd like to have a ruling from Mrs. Shaw that it's acceptable to take a question that's been posted in chat and use my position as a councillor to relay that.
I'd like to say that I'd be prepared to allow that, Ollie, because I was going to invite Caroline Chambers to put her suggestion otherwise, so certainly make it on her behalf. Sure, that's all right, Mr. Shaw.
I'm sure she'd be quite happy to do it herself if you were going to invite her.
Well, no, I was hoping that councillors, members would pick up on it first.
Oh, okay. That's fine. If that's acceptable to Mrs. Shaw, then then I'll only put one of the questions because there are a number coming up from the public speakers. But it was just to check with Mr. Dart that the protection for properties, which you've indicated would continue if they were under threat. Would that include cesspits and septic tanks and so on, their sewage outlets?
It's difficult to say because obviously the pollution of watercourses and groundwater is covered by a different team in the Environment Agency. And it is something we looked at. And when I say property, I do mean the fully functional of that property. And so, we do look at the sewage system combined with the households. And again, I don't know whether the septic tanks are in this area. I'm not that familiar with individual property and their circumstances. It's something we do look at, and I have looked up at other schemes for other houses, but it's done, it's done whether you sacrifice a septic tank and you move it or something like that compared to putting in a flood more in a different position. But it can be done, but it's hard to know exactly what could be done in this instance.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yes, thank you. A question for Mr. Dart, I think. My understanding is from the papers that the spit will open, the mouth of the river will open some extent. I was wondering over time, to what extent will that open, and could we see a disappearance of the beach as we know it now?
I think this is covered in the report, and coastal erosion or coastal changes are really a remit of East Devon Council as they're the coastal authority. But it will change, and that's looked in the report that it will widen. But at the moment, it's artificial. It's not going to stay like it is, and we've got this problem around many places around the southwest due to changes in storminess and sea level rise. And certainly this is one of the areas where coastal change is expected. And with this, it will allow more water into the estuary and faster, but the nature will balance itself out. That's what it likes to do. We are artificially keeping it in a what's the right word? Unsustainable or not very efficient way. So it will change. I can't say that hand on my heart that it will, won't not disappear or whatever. But the science sort of says that, that in the reports that it's going to be get wider but won't disappear.
Chair, you was on mute.
That's unheard of. Councillor Jeb Pook.
Thank you, Chair. It's really coming down to, it's very difficult for us to really assess, the difference between two experts. And so I'd just like a bit of comment from the Environment Agency or any of the others. Do they, and I accept that Mr. Dart is from a different wing of the Environment Agency, but is it really acceptable for us, or have we had enough sort of peer review of the studies to be able to be sure that we are looking at the best information possible? With all the will in the world, an Environment Agency, Mr. Dart is part of the Environment Agency, and I know that he works for a different element of it, but in other elements, I'm sure we'd be looking for independent review of this, as opposed to something within something which is, I assume, covered by a glass ceiling or a glass wall. And that just makes me feel slightly unsettled about approving it, whether or not we have got a completely independent or peer-reviewed flood assessment. And just like another comment from the Environment Agency people, please.
I would say that obviously the person or the company that produced the flood risk assessment in the first place are international experts, and they're well recognised. I've worked with quite a few of them for many years in this area. Mike Williams, who did the speaking, is available to answer some of these questions if you feel it necessary, Chair, in that sort of side of things. But your own flood risk engineer, Tom Bloxson Smith, could review this. But if you went on to any independent person and consultancy, they would say the same thing as Jacobs. The modelling has been checked by several different people, and therefore the results are checked by several different people, and then the interpretation of the planning guidance is entered by several different people who all have professional qualifications. So that's the sort of kind of thing you've done. You could get a further check, but it really isn't going to do much. The modelling is the modelling. And myself and other people have looked at it and said, yes, that is well within the normal accuracies to produce the flood risk assessment.
Thank you. I see Mike Williams, you'd like to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Mr. Dart has said, our consultants are independent of the Environment Agency. They don't always tell us what we might like. They sometimes bear bad news as well as good, but they are independent. And then, as I have said before, the review of the plan application internally in the Environment Agency is another independent step. I see that it's being questioned about whether this is truly independent or not. I'd just like to compare this with, for example, the Environment Agency constructing flood defences at Exmouth, which your committee will know well about. It's exactly the same process there. The planning application for the improvements to the defences is reviewed internally by the Environment Agency by a different team. There is no doubt in my mind that these things are independent, and indeed it's not just about flood risk. The planning application has been reviewed not only by our colleagues in the flood risk team, but in all sorts of other departments across the Environment Agency. And indeed, there is then a response from the Environment Agency to your authority about that. So, for example, groundwater, and our groundwater and contaminated land colleagues have specifically asked for conditions relating to groundwater. So I would like to say that I think it is our approach is beyond reproach in terms of the independence which is provided.
Thank you very much. Perhaps as the Exmouth Tidal Defence Scheme has been mentioned, I should declare a former interest as member of the South West Regional Flood and Coastal Committee when that scheme was being promoted.
Sorry, Chair, can I also, sorry, Chair, can I also say that just to reiterate from a planning point of view, you know, there's the independent people that wrote the report. That's been checked by the Environment Agency as the client. That's then been checked by the Environment Agency separate to them being the client and the applicant. And so from a planning perspective, we as officers are confident as we can be with those reports, and do believe that if we went elsewhere, we would have the same feedback and reports. And I suppose what I would add is I don't see what benefit there would be to Clinton Devon, the Environment Agency as the applicant, or to the Environment Agency through Mr. Dart of doing anything but making sure that this scheme is the best it can be. There'd be no benefit to them providing us with wrong information, because down the line they'll get caught out or something would go wrong. So I fully trust their professionalism in this.
Yes, I'd like to endorse those comments, and certainly in my work with the Environment Agency on that committee over quite a few years, I found them to be very knowledgeable and helpful and very professional. There's only one instance where I found they failed, and I'm not going to say that that is, but I think Mike's laughing, he'll know. But on the whole, yes, very professional, and it's in the public interest. After all, it's public money. So anyway, next we have questions from Councillor Kim Bloxson.
Thank you, Chair. Wow, it's been quite an interesting listening to all the comments from both sides from some very interesting and knowledgeable people this morning. One of the sentences that I did pick up from one of the speakers was that we should manage change in a considered and controlled way. And at the moment, I'm feeling that that's the way this scheme is going. But away from the flood question, I believe one of the ward members, Councillor Alan Dent, also raised the question about the reduction in car parking, and whether I can ask Mr. Rose as to whether there is any possibility to increase any of the car parking as asked by Councillor Dent. I'm sure that question has already been looked at many times, but perhaps Mr. Rose could respond to that. Thank you.
Mr. Rose.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it was raised during the part of the application and previously in the run up to it, particularly by the ward members, because of the concern or the comments that the 40 or roughly 40 spaces in the new car park won't mitigate for the loss of all of the car parking spaces off the road at the moment. And that's partly because a number of those parking spaces off the road at the moment aren't authorised. So they're sort of going into lay-bys off the verges. So they're sort of creeping into what should be the natural environment. So the scheme is very much done to just mitigate the loss or to replace those lawful spaces that are there. But alongside that, there's also the issue of not trying to make this into a visitor attraction and therefore minimising the spaces here, having enough to mitigate the loss, but then also trying to direct people to Line Kiln. So it has been looked at. I do understand the concerns, but on balance, it's considered that the number that they've come up with in that area is acceptable, and that, as I say, we should be directing people to Limekiln if there's if people want to go there to benefit from the walks. So from a planning perspective, we've got the application and the numbers that are there, and we have raised that, and we feel that it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, Councillor Skinner.
Madam Chairman, I don't want to ask a question. I want to move into the debate, but if there's any other questions, I'll heed to your finding out from one of the members if there are any questions before I wade into the debate.
Yeah, no, are there, if anyone wants to ask any more questions, now's the time to do so. Referring to, from the chat, Caroline Chambers, I think the issues you raise about sewage and septic tanks and things, they can be discussed at the meeting with the Frogmore Road residents that they'll be having with the Environment Agency. I'm sure that they'll have full and transparent responses from the Environment Agency. So unless anyone else wants to speak, and I see no other hands, okay, then we'll start the debate. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much, Chair, and what a wonderful debate we've had, and we've been some considerable time just getting nearly 2 hours just getting to this point just to discuss it. But it is such an important issue that I feel it absolutely needed. The way you've run it has been absolutely excellent. You've done it very professionally, and you've allowed everybody to get in and ask questions of very professional people, because it's that important, and we need to get this right. So I thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you.
My view on this is that I've been listening and talking about this for a very long time, and you, Chair, and myself and many others have lived in this area for a very long time. We understand that, and change is sometimes difficult. But what we all have to face is climate change. It's an issue that seems to raise its head, but it doesn't actually touch any of us in a daily way, but it does sort of creep up on us as we're leading our lives. And the one thing that I really, really appreciate about this application in the way that the landowners of Clinton Devon Estates, who have, as quite rightly suggested by Dr. Sam Bridgewater, that they've been here for 700 years, and looking and strategic planning and looking to the future, is absolutely fundamentally important as to how we're going to go forward. We have to understand the debate, take the debate forward. And this is one way of working strategically. And actually what's trying to happen here is do something that we don't usually do. We're usually putting up flood defences after we've had the flood, after things have happened, saying here's where a problem could be. This is actually getting in place. And Chair, along with you and some of us other members, it was really interesting that we may know the area when we had that site meeting down in Budley, and we actually walked the path and the lights and fully understood the implications of what this is and how important this is. So for me, in understanding how the landowners, the applicants, have worked very closely with the Environment Agency, and I have absolutely no doubt about the Environment Agency's credibility in the way of doing this. It's not an issue for me. I'm absolutely sure that the Environment Agency are here as a body and as a government body and representing people to be doing the right thing. And I'm really pleased that they've actually, within their own organisation, understood the checks and balances that need to be made within its own organisation in working with applicants in getting the best way forward, but making sure that that is absolutely stood to scrutiny within their own organisation. So for me, that is actually a no-brainer for me. I'm absolutely totally happy with the way that this is being done. What this will do, Chair, and for all other members, is this is something that is going to be on a big scale. It's going to be a real game changer. And there's one or two things here we need to understand. What was really important in the way you chaired the meeting, Chair, and the way you asked the questions, was to get the understanding that before we got into the debate, what were the mitigating circumstances of which some members of the public really felt about the issues that we're going to touch them. And I think we've got to that point. And that point is that what people don't want to see, they want to see protection of their own homes, and we need to get to that place. And lots of those things have been answered, but at the same time, in going on and having that meeting with the Frogmore Lane residents is absolutely key in that going forward to make sure that happens. I believe that along with the applicants, the Environment Agency and the residents and the people of East Devon and the East Devon District Council, that we all want to end up into a good place. Chair, we're giving the opportunity for other members to speak. What I'm going to say is that there is going to be lots of issues that are going to come up, and no doubt it's going to go on for some while yet. I would like to take this opportunity to propose a recommendation of approval for this application. I think it's fundamentally important, the principles of that. I would like to take forward that the recommendation of approval that I'd like to put forward that are within the recommendations within the report, of also picking up with the recommendations that Mr. Chris Rose actually put forward in for the prevention and the helping of the residents meeting that they have with the Environment Agency in time, and that I leave it open through you, Chair, that if any other recommendations that may want to come forward, we would discuss those and debate those as we go forward. That's my position. I'll leave it there, and I'm sure there's much more to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner, and thank you for your kind words. Much appreciated. Is there a seconder for that?
Yes, yes, Madam Chairman.
We got several. Councillor Key.
Yes, yes.
You're seconding. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Now we have Councillor Bruce Desarum.
Thank you, Chair. I must thank both you and Megan Rimmer for organising the observation visit which we went to last month, which some of us attended. I thought it was most useful and informative in helping me to come to an understanding of the benefits of this project, which essentially, as the speaker has spoken about today, is to will maintain the walking wildlife and scenery of the area. And I think that some of the positive things are, firstly, the relocation of the Budley Salterton Cricket Club, which the ward members spoke about, which would be a great benefit to the Budley community. And secondly, the complete relocation of the South Farm Road with the creation of the new car park. And I note that the new car park will be to mitigate the loss of lawful spaces. So this is very positive. And I think that it's important that we note that more visitors will be attracted to the area. So whilst I personally think it's disappointing that there'll be no formal visitor style centre created as at the Seaton Wetlands, I can see that the creation of the intertidal salt marsh and mudflats will allow a wide variety of birds to actively make use of this area, even if there's no formal centre for humans to view them. And that, as was touched on this morning, there will be significant visual change to improve what exists. And I think, as was previously mentioned by Councillor Skinner, the key problem is at Frogmore Road, and I think Mr. Rose's recommendation is very important, and we must definitely include that. So therefore, Chair, I would have to agree with the report's comments, specifically that this application should be supported, because, as we've heard, it allows for the enhancement in habitat. And basically, people are already at risk today, as we've heard in this meeting. It will improve public access, for example, the creation of the new car park. It will benefit the local economy and preserve footpaths. And as one of the speakers has said today, it will maintain the status as a World Heritage status, as outlined by Sam Scrivell. So I think, having listened to all these arguments and seen these benefits, clearly, as in all planning applications, the benefits that we've heard do outweigh the disadvantages. And I think, provided we put the proper conditions on the Kemp as we've discussed, I think, as Councillor Skinner said, it's good to go forward. And like Councillor Skinner said, I think it's important to hear what other members have to say today. So thank you very much indeed, Chair. And may I also add my congratulations to the very succinct way you've run this meeting today so far. Thank you, Chair.
Very kind of you. Thank you, Councillor Desarum. Councillor Jed Pook.
Thank you. As I think I started off earlier before, as non-experts, it's difficult for us to really judge this, but we asked the question, we've been assured by the applicant and by our own officers that this has been, that the reports have been independently assessed, and they are the best possible understanding of what's going to happen. So I think on that basis, we have to accept the reports. Accepting the reports then makes us look at what's going to happen. and the reports and everything points to a basic benefit to the area, benefit long term from a flooding point of view, benefit from environment, etc. And therefore, on balance, on the basis that we have independent reports, verified, got the best advice, I'm happy to support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Pook. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is going to involve a massive change to the Otter Valley, and I do understand that, and I do understand how frightening that is for some people, and change always gives rise to alarm. But on the whole, I think this is going to actually lead to an improvement of the existing situation. I do understand the concerns of nearby residents, and I hope the Environment Agency can assure them that their fears are not founded. I'm satisfied as I can be. As Councillor Pook has said, we're not experts on flood risk assessments. That it's not going to lead to any increase in the risks to the residents of Frogmore Road, which actually I walked along on Sunday, just happened to be passing that way. But overall, as other councillors have said, this is an improvement to the existing situation. It's been asserted that this is unpredictable, and to some extent it is. You never quite know how water will behave. You only have to knock a glass of water over to think, how on earth did it go there? It is a little bit of an unknown quantity, but I'm satisfied that the Environment Agency have taken every care to ensure that they understand what is likely to happen in this situation. And I'm going to be sorry to lose some of the habitat we have along there. I'm a regular walker along all parts of the Otter Valley. I love it dearly, but actually I'm quite looking forward to seeing how this evolves. And I think it will be interesting to go and see what happens as the embankment is breached and floodwater starts to intrude and can get out again. And I think that's an important thing, that the floodwater will come and go, whereas at the moment, as we've heard, the Budley Cricket Club flooded for weeks, if not months, because the water just couldn't get out again. So I think it is an improvement to the existing situation. And as we've heard, doing nothing is not an option. It's simply going to mean continuing to try to kind of do a kind of patchwork protection of the existing situation. And I certainly remember when the footpath was washed away, it was repaired, and within a few months it had washed away again and was closed once again. So I look forward to seeing the changes there, and I think the protection of South Farm Road is to be welcomed. I quite often go to the shop at South Farm, so I shall look forward to being able to get along there without impediment. The waste tip is going to actually be made more safe. So I think concerns about leaching into the aquifers, and I've got an interest in that, being a resident of Exmouth, because our water comes from those aquifers. And parking, I think actually 40 spaces is fairly generous compared to what's along there at the moment. I don't think there's actually any loss of spaces there. And it will certainly be more formalised, and also the experience for visitors to that car park will mean that they don't have to walk along the road any further. There will be a footpath which will make it much more accessible. So I think it will actually be an improved visitor experience. And I do share some of the concerns about an increase in visitor numbers, but there are a colossal number of people using that footpath at the moment anyway. So I'm very happy to support this application, and I look forward to seeing how it evolves in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Well, how far forward we've moved over the years, becoming increasingly aware of the environment, because many years ago, I remember seeing the refuse lorries tip all the household waste onto Imperial Recreation Ground. And that's now, well, it's been beautifully landscaped, and it's a triple SI, special protection area. It's special conservation area. It's quite remarkable how things have moved, and to think that there was a waste tip in the Otter Valley there. And just for information, environment and planning used to be together, used to be one portfolio holder, and now it's become so vast. That's how acutely aware we've become of our environment that it's quite considerable, the changes that have been, the progress that's been made, and the awareness, certainly in my lifetime, in the last 10 years, in fact. So anyway, we have Councillor Jeff Pratt next. Councillor
Thank
Pratt.
you, Chair.
Thank you.
I do have concerns about the matter of flooding and the properties close by to this project. It is a worry, and that must be considered a harm to the area. But overall, I think the benefits of the proposal do outweigh the harm. But I think the Environment Agency need to be very careful about flooding and keep on their toes on that aspect of it. But otherwise, I support the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Kathy McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking that the EA, the Environmental Agency, have spent so much time, energy and effort on this. I can't begin to imagine that it could be anything but for the greater good. Totally understand the Frogmore Lane residents' concerns. I'm sure I would feel the same as they, should I be living near this. But I think Mr. Dart has reassured us several times that the homes won't be flooded. He seems to say it will be gardens, which are already flooding there, and rising by a few millimetres. But he has said that the homes won't be flooded. I mean, obviously that isn't way into the future, because we don't know with climate change what's going to happen and how far the water levels will rise. But just hoping that when the Frogmore Lane residents get together with the Environment Agency, that they get decent and good reassurance that they will remain safe and not find their properties submerged. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. And Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, just to say I did find the site visit very helpful indeed to get an overall picture of sort of both ends of the project. Obviously, there are many objections from speakers, but overall, I think we're looking at the restoration, which is the word used in the title. So I think that's a good thing to be going back, undoing what was done 200 years ago. But I think it's also important to avoid the patchwork protection, which Councillor Davey mentioned, that we do have don't react only to events as they arise, but actually take a managed view to issues so that we're protected going forward. And I'm also encouraged by all the consultees who, such as Natural England, RSPB, Devon Wildlife Trust, and Jurassic Coast, and also very pleased to see that CPRE have changed their mind, having reviewed the project further. So overall, I would support the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I have no more blue hands raised. So Mrs. Shaw, could you sum up, please? And could you mention the conditions, include any conditions, please, as has been proposed?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did want to just check with Councillor Skinner and Councillors Key that they were happy to include the additional condition relating to the monitoring of Frogmore Road that was proposed by Chris Rose, and also the 3 additional conditions requested by Natural England in relation to ecology, habitat, mitigation and monitoring. If they could just confirm that that was what they meant in their recommendations to the committee.
From Councillor Key doesn't mind if I go first. I've absolutely
no I'm happy to agree with you, Philip.
Yeah, if that is the case, what I would just like to do through you, Chair, if I could, is that I believe Mr. Rose had some particular points, and I just want to make sure if Mr. Rose wanted to take this opportunity to make any, if he has any further comments at this point, because now's the time to add to any of that. Just I want to be absolutely clear about where we're going with this. Mr. Rose.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy with that direction. As Councillor, as Mrs. Shaw has said, there were late comments received only yesterday, in fact, from the Environment Agency about those 3 additional conditions that are about ecological management and monitoring. So they were the additional ones that Mrs. Shaw had recommended. So there's 3 extra conditions on that, and then also the condition in relation to Frogmore Road, which I would see as being along the lines of the Environment Agency reporting back to us once they have had that meeting with the residents on Frogmore Road, and if as an outcome of that meeting there are any changes needed, then that they are put forward to us so that we cover that point and those concerns of those residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, would it be helpful for the ward members to attend that meeting as well? Perhaps Mr. Shaw could advise.
Sorry, yes, that's fine to include that. I don't think you can include that as a recommendation in a condition.
No. It would be a meeting between the Environment Agency and the Frogmore Road residents, but to include the ward members if they want to attend.
Yes.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, for Mrs. Shaw, then absolutely I agree with the recommendations that have been put forward. I think we've covered everything. I think that's proper, right and correct. Thank you.
Okay, then. Thank you. Mrs. Shaw, can you sum up, please, now and take us to the vote?
Thank you, yes, thank you, Chair. Members, there are 2 elements to this recommendation. The first is to adopt the appropriate assessment that was attached to the report, and then to approve the planning permission subject to the conditions as listed and to the additional conditions that have just been discussed, which are before you. And there will also be any additional, I would recommend you delegate if there are any additional amendments to those conditions following from the meeting to the manager of development control. Therefore, if you would please indicate when your name is called whether you are in support of the motion to approve, against the motion to approve, or whether please raise your blue hand if you are abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with Councillor Bloxson.
Support the motion to approve.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Support the motion to approve.
Councillor Coleman.
Support the motion to approve.
Councillor Davey.
Support.
Councillor De Sarum.
Support the motion to approve, including the 2 elements already also discussed.
Councillor Gazzard.
Approve.
Councillor Howe.
Support.
Councillor Key.
Support approval.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Support.
Councillor Pook.
Support.
Councillor Pratt.
Support.
Councillor Skinner.
Support.
Councillor Whibley.
Support.
Councillor Woodward.
Support.
Councillor Ragg.
Support.
Thank you. That motion to approve has been carried.
Thank you very much. That was unanimous. I would at this point like to thank the Environment Agency, Simon Dart, Mike Williams, Megan Rimmer for helping to arrange the meeting. I'd also like to reassure the residents that Clinton Devon Estates have a long established reputation as being very good stewards of the land in their ownership. Had it not been for the former Lord Markville, we wouldn't have the fabulous sea wall in Exmouth, which was built in 1841. So they have managed their lands very well, and they are very forward thinking in their approach. And I know that they have representation on the national board of the Environment Agency as well, to make sure that we have a voice from this part of the world. So many, many thanks to all of you, all members as well. It's been an extremely thorough debate, I believe, and thank you to both the objectors and the supporters. I know that all your concerns may not have been allayed, but you will have the opportunity to voice those at your future meeting with the Environment Agency. So thank you very much, everybody. And I'd like at this point as well to adjourn the meeting. We'll take a break. And shall we reconvene at 1:15? That'll give us breathing space because we have another major application this afternoon. So thank you very much to everybody for taking part in what's been, I believe, an excellent debate. And I think it was the right decision. Thank you.
Chair, could I just interrupt? All the speakers for the next application are in, so could you please just clarify what time they'll need to come back to the meeting, please?
Yes, shall we say 1 o'clock? Is that okay with everybody? 1 o'clock? Okay, 1 o'clock. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect. Right, I'll stop the live